people who made fun of him right near his death.
What really happened that night between Elvis and Ann-Margret, hidden for decades behind closed doors until now. There was more than heartbreak brewing. It was a meltdown that changed everything. And the person who finally decided to speak? She waited until she was 82. Keep watching. You won't believe what she's been keeping secret all these years. When Elvis Presley met Ann-Margret on the set of Viva Las Vegas in 1963, the chemistry was instant, undeniable, and explosive. The cameras captured it, crew whispered about it, and audiences around the world felt it pouring off the screen. But what people didn't see was how quickly that chemistry turned into something more. A secret affair that threatened to tear apart Elvis's carefully controlled life. This wasn't just another Hollywood fling. Ann-Margret herself would later describe their bond as almost spiritual, saying they shared the same impulses, the same quirks, even the same restless energy. It was as if they were mirror images of one another. At first, their relationship was hidden under the cover of long rehearsals, late-night conversations, and music sessions that went far past midnight. But in truth, their connection was too fiery to stay private. Friends of Elvis noticed a change in him immediately. He became restless, more protective, more intense. He wasn't just infatuated, he was obsessed. Ann-Margret was different from Priscilla, who at the time was still waiting in the shadows of Graceland, bound by rules Elvis had set for her. Ann-Margret was bold, playful, and unapologetically her own woman. For a man who had everything but still craved freedom, she was irresistible. But Hollywood couldn't help itself. Soon, gossip columnists began sniffing around the set. Reports leaked of stolen glances, whispered exchanges, and nights where Elvis and Ann-Margret disappeared without explanation. The more they denied it, the more the press believed it. And then came the spark that ignited the firestorm. The claim that Ann-Margret was engaged to Elvis. Whether it was a publicity stunt, a slip of the tongue, or a desperate bid for attention, no one really knew. But the impact was catastrophic. For Elvis, who was already juggling the pressure of fame, his fragile relationship with Priscilla, and his own volatile emotions, this was gasoline on an open flame. Priscilla reportedly exploded in anger when she heard the news, smashing a vase and demanding answers. Elvis denied the engagement, but he didn't exactly deny the relationship either. The truth was tangled somewhere in the middle, and the media feasted on every contradiction. To the outside world, Elvis and Ann-Margret were simply two dazzling stars who had created movie magic. But those closest to them saw the truth. Their relationship was reckless, passionate, and dangerous. They weren't just co-stars. They were soulmates, colliding at full speed, with no brakes to stop what was coming. And it all built toward one night. A night that Ann-Margret, now at 82 years old, has finally spoken about, after decades of silence. A night that didn't just test their relationship, but revealed something shocking about Elvis himself. Because what happened behind closed doors wasn't the glamorous romance fans wanted to believe. It was much darker. But the real meltdown, the one Ann-Margret protected for so long, was about to explode. The moment whispers of Elvis and Ann-Margret's affair hit the press, the story took on a life of its own. At first, it was speculation, just the tabloids looking for heat. But then came the shocking headline: Ann-Margret was engaged to Elvis Presley. It was the kind of announcement that could have been planted by a mischievous journalist, a slip during an interview, or even a studio tactic to keep the buzz around Viva Las Vegas alive. Whatever its origin, the words were devastating. Inside Graceland, the news detonated like a bomb. Priscilla Presley, who had already endured years of waiting quietly in Elvis's shadow, finally snapped. She confronted him in a fit of rage. According to insiders, she hurled a vase across the room, shattering it into pieces, and demanded to know the truth. Was she being replaced? Had she wasted years of her life waiting for a man who was about to publicly crown another woman as his bride? Elvis, cornered and furious, denied the engagement story. But his denial carried a dangerous edge. It wasn't a denial of Ann-Margret. It was a denial of being caught. The press loved every second of it. Elvis's clean-cut image, carefully crafted by Colonel Tom Parker, was under threat. The king of rock and roll couldn't be seen as reckless, cheating, or weak. Yet here he was, caught between two women, and the public was salivating over every headline. Colonel Parker scrambled to control the narrative, pushing Elvis to make statements that distanced him from Ann-Margret. But behind closed doors, the bond between the two stars only grew stronger. Ann-Margret didn't help matters either. In interviews, she hinted at their closeness, without ever fully admitting it, adding fuel to the fire. Some claimed she reveled in the chaos, others said she was simply naive about how her words would be twisted. Either way, the public now saw her not just as Elvis's co-star, but as the woman who might steal him away for good. Meanwhile, Elvis himself was spiraling. The tension between protecting his image, keeping Priscilla under control, and feeding his obsession with Ann-Margret became unbearable. His temper flared. His moods swung wildly. Friends recalled nights when he would rant about being trapped, about the crushing weight of fame, and about the women in his life pulling him in different directions. It wasn't just about love anymore. It was about control, pride, and the image he was desperate to maintain. The engagement scandal turned Elvis's private life into public theater. What should have been a carefully hidden affair was now a national obsession, and both women were caught in the crossfire. For Ann-Margret, it meant headlines that painted her as the other woman, the temptress. For Priscilla, it meant humiliation. And for Elvis, it meant rage. Rage that would soon erupt in a way no one expected. Because as the press storm reached its peak, the real drama wasn't happening in front of cameras or in the newspapers. It was unfolding in private, in a single night that would haunt Ann-Margret for decades. A night so explosive that she refused to reveal the details until she was 82 years old. And what she finally confessed suggests Elvis wasn't just the king of rock and roll, he was a man on the edge of breaking apart. Behind the glitz of Hollywood and the screaming fans, there was a night that Ann-Margret has only recently hinted at, one that shattered the glamorous illusion of their romance. It happened when the pressure of the affair, the lies, and the headlines all collided. Elvis, normally the polished star who controlled every move, reportedly lost control in a way that shocked even Ann-Margret. According to whispers from insiders, it began with a fight. Elvis had discovered something that sent him spiraling, whether it was Priscilla threatening to leave, Ann-Margret being seen with another man, or simply the mounting stress of the engagement scandal. No one can say for sure. But that night, he snapped. He raged, pacing the room, throwing objects, slamming his fists against the walls. His voice, the same one that enchanted millions, now shook with anger and fear. Ann-Margret, who had seen the passionate, playful side of Elvis, was stunned by the darkness she witnessed. Some say he accused her of betraying him, others that he threatened to end everything if she ever revealed the truth. There are even rumors he broke down in tears, confessing he felt trapped in a life that wasn't his own. Whatever happened, it was raw, violent, and unforgettable. For decades, Ann-Margret refused to describe the details. In interviews, she would smile wistfully and say their relationship was special, unique, but private. That word, private, was her shield. She protected Elvis's reputation at all costs. But those close to her always suspected that the silence hid something far more unsettling than a simple breakup. Because this wasn't just an argument, it was a meltdown that revealed the cracks in Elvis's carefully curated image. To the world, he was untouchable, the king. But in that room, with Ann-Margret as his only witness, he was fragile, volatile, and dangerously human. And while she may have chosen silence out of loyalty, fear, or love, the memory of that night never left her. Decades later, when she finally spoke of it, she didn't give every detail, but she gave enough to confirm what many had whispered for years. Elvis Presley had a darkness he couldn't hide forever. But why, after 60 years of secrecy, did Ann-Margret finally decide to reveal this piece of the puzzle? The answer to that lies in what she endured in the years that followed. For more than half a century, Ann-Margret carried the weight of that night without speaking a word. The question everyone asks is, why? Why protect Elvis when she could have cleared her own name, silenced the rumors, and told the world what really happened? The truth is complicated, and it shows just how deeply loyalty and fear can run. In the 1960s, Elvis Presley wasn't just a superstar, he was an empire. His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, guarded that empire with ruthless precision. Nothing was allowed to tarnish Elvis's image, and anyone who threatened to expose his weaknesses risked being destroyed by the machine around him. Ann-Margret knew this. She had seen firsthand how Parker manipulated the press and controlled the narrative. Speaking out could have ruined her career, or worse, put her safety at risk. There was also love, real, powerful love. For all the chaos and secrecy, Ann-Margret adored Elvis. He had opened himself to her in ways he hadn't with anyone else, and she felt bound to him, even after the affair ended. In her mind, protecting him meant protecting the vulnerable man she'd glimpsed behind the king's crown. Revealing his meltdown would have meant betraying that bond, and she wasn't willing to cross that line. But silence came with a price. While she bit her tongue, the world labeled her as the other woman, the homewrecker, who nearly tore Elvis's marriage apart. Tabloids painted her as a manipulator. Priscilla was cast as the victim, and Elvis walked away, appearing untouchable. Ann-Margret absorbed the scandal without ever defending herself, a choice that baffled many at the time. As the years passed, the weight of that secret grew heavier. Friends noticed her tone shift when Elvis's name came up, sometimes wistful, sometimes somber. She kept her memories locked away, refusing to hand them over to biographers or journalists desperate for juicy details. But the silence wasn't just about fear of Colonel Parker or loyalty to Elvis. It was about timing. The world wasn't ready to see its idol as anything less than perfect. Only now, decades later, has Ann-Margret chosen to hint at the truth. At 82, with her own legendary career behind her, she has nothing to lose and no image left to protect. Finally, she can speak with freedom. And what she revealed, though carefully measured, was enough to confirm suspicions long buried. Elvis wasn't just a victim of fame, he was also a man wrestling demons that very few ever saw. But Ann-Margret's revelation didn't just reopen old wounds, it sparked a wave of speculation. Because if she stayed silent this long, what other secrets about that night are still buried? And the clues may be hiding in places no one expected. Once Ann-Margret finally broke her silence, even slightly, fans and historians rushed to piece together what really happened that night. And what surfaced was a patchwork of rumors, letters, and whispers that painted a far darker picture than anyone imagined. Some point to an old interview where Elvis's closest friends, the so-called Memphis Mafia, hinted at his explosive temper when he felt cornered. They spoke of nights when he'd hurl objects across the room, smashing lamps and mirrors in fits of jealousy. Could that be the very behavior Ann-Margret witnessed? Others say there were letters exchanged between her and Elvis, passionate but tinged with desperation, that hinted at a secret crisis. Those letters, if they exist, have never been made public, but the speculation has only fueled curiosity. Then there are the conspiracy theories. Some fans believe Priscilla herself found out about the meltdown and used it to strengthen her control over Elvis. Others claim Colonel Parker orchestrated a cover-up, ensuring no press ever learned about the eruption behind closed doors. Biographers have noted strange inconsistencies in Elvis's schedule around that period, abrupt cancellations, unexplained absences that may point to a night so chaotic it had to be buried under excuses. What makes it even more fascinating is Ann-Margret's wording. When she finally spoke, she didn't outright describe violence, but she called the incident a turning point and said it revealed a side of Elvis no one else saw. Those carefully chosen words left plenty of room for interpretation, and fans have taken them in every direction, from a breakdown fueled by guilt to an episode of uncontrolled rage. The most shocking rumor? That Elvis threatened to harm himself if Ann-Margret ever left him. Friends later admitted he had moments where he feared losing control, admitting he sometimes felt he couldn't go on. If true, that would explain why Ann-Margret shielded the memory for so long. It wasn't just about protecting his image, it was about protecting the fragile man beneath it. What we're left with today is a puzzle of partial truths and whispered recollections, with Ann-Margret holding the final piece. But while she may never fully reveal every detail, her hint was enough to change how we see Elvis forever. Because once you accept that night happened, you can no longer look at him as the flawless king. You see a man unraveling behind the curtain and a woman who carried the burden of his secret for decades. And it's that burden, the silence, the sacrifice, that reshaped both their legacies. but the way history now views Elvis and Ann-Margret couldn't be more different. Elvis Presley's legacy has always been larger than life. The king of rock and roll, the global icon, the man who revolutionized music and culture. But Ann-Margret's recent revelation casts a shadow across that carefully polished image. It reminds us that behind the dazzling jumpsuits and screaming crowds, Elvis was human, flawed, fragile, and volatile. For fans who worshipped him as untouchable, this truth is difficult to digest. Yet it also makes his story more tragic, more real. Ann-Margret's legacy, by contrast, has taken on a new light. For years, she was painted as the temptress who nearly stole Elvis away from Priscilla. She carried that stigma in silence, never fighting back, never exposing what truly happened. But now, with her confession, she emerges not as a villain, but as someone who showed remarkable restraint and loyalty. She protected Elvis's reputation at her own expense, carrying his secret for 60 years. That kind of silence is its own form of sacrifice, one that shifts how the world sees her role in his life. It also redefines their relationship. For decades, it was remembered as a glamorous Hollywood fling, two stars who burned bright together before moving on. But now, it's clear that their connection went far deeper. Ann-Margret wasn't just a co-star or a lover. She was the one person Elvis trusted enough to reveal his breaking point. That makes her silence even more powerful. She held the key to a side of Elvis no one else ever witnessed, and she chose not to use it until now. The public reaction has been mixed. Some fans feel betrayed, questioning why she waited so long. Others admire her even more for holding on to the secret out of love and loyalty. And for Elvis's die-hard followers, the revelation forces a reckoning. Can you still idolize a man once you've seen his cracks? Or does knowing his struggles make him more relatable, more tragic, and more human? What's undeniable is this: Ann-Margret's words have changed the conversation. Elvis will always be remembered as the king, but now, part of that crown comes with the weight of vulnerability and hidden demons. And Ann-Margret, once relegated to the shadows of his story, now stands in the spotlight as the witness who carried the truth all along. But the most haunting part isn't how their legacies contrast. It's what the revelation implies about everything fans thought they knew. Because if Elvis could hide this so well, what else has been hidden all these years? And that brings us to the shocking implication, one that shakes the foundation of his legend itself. For fans who grew up idolizing Elvis Presley, Ann-Margret's revelation doesn't just add a new chapter, it rewrites the story entirely. The king wasn't just a symbol of charisma and control. He was a man capable of spiraling into chaos behind closed doors. And if that meltdown really happened the way she suggests, it forces us to question how much of Elvis's life was carefully staged to hide the truth. Imagine re-watching Viva Las Vegas now. The playful smiles, the electric chemistry, they're no longer just acting. They're the visible sparks of a relationship that was burning too hot, one that carried the seeds of destruction beneath its glamour. Fans can't see those scenes the same way again, not knowing what was happening off-camera. It transforms the movie from a light-hearted romance into a time capsule of passion, secrecy, and looming disaster. Even Elvis's marriage to Priscilla takes on new weight. Was it ever truly stable? Or was it built on fragile foundations already cracking from his obsession with Ann-Margret? For years, the official story painted him as a conflicted husband, torn but loyal in the end. Now, the cracks in that narrative are impossible to ignore. If he could lose control so completely, how much more turmoil was buried beneath the polished surface of Graceland? And then, there's Ann-Margret herself. Her silence for decades wasn't weakness, it was strength. She protected not just a man, but an entire myth, carrying the burden alone. Fans now look at her with a new kind of respect. She wasn't the scheming other woman the tabloids claimed. She was the keeper of Elvis's darkest secret. That decision to stay silent and the courage to finally speak at 82 has reshaped her legacy forever. The implication is clear. Elvis's legend, as we've known it, is incomplete. His crown was polished for the world, but it hid the cracks of a man unraveling. Ann-Margret's revelation doesn't erase his greatness. It deepens it. It paints him as both an icon and a man undone by pressure, desire, and demons he could never control. And for fans, that's the real shock. Elvis wasn't just the king of rock and roll. He was a man fighting battles no one saw, except for Ann-Margret, who finally let the world glimpse the truth. But if one hidden night could stay buried for 60 years, the question becomes, how many more secrets are still locked away in the story of Elvis Presley?